Well, that's interesting because I remember back to the talk shows of the 90s. You had Jenny Jones and Montel Williams, and then all of a sudden the Jerry Springer and the Maury Povich started doing the really sensationalistic stuff. And it seems like now we're seeing that too. And forgive me, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so do you think we'll ever have stuff that has a higher purpose to it? You know, that's maybe...
I think we have it now.
Okay.
I think you're not watching the right content.
Okay.
I think that actually the really malicious, mean-spirited prank shows, have you not noticed a decline in those?
Haven't watched.
I think people are getting a little bit tired of super negative, humiliating content.
So we've evolved.
I think we have. I think we've gotten past the part where just being awful is not, and as part of a spectacle, is kind of, those days are behind us.
Well, I know Morgan Spurlock did The Day in the Life, and he did one on Mark Maron. It was great.
Right.
Did one on Terry Guetta from Banksy. So he, you know, that one had much more of a higher purpose because it was about these artists following their, you know, day-to-day lives. So you think people are maybe done with some of the women pushing each other into a pool and saying mean things?
Well, I don't think that naturally occurring conflict is ever going to go away. What I'm talking about is a show where someone's sitting in a car and a guy dressed as a 6-foot-tall alien walks over a hill and rips the doors off the car and starts dragging people off into the night to the point where the person has to spend time in therapy. I think those shows are behind us because I think too much of it kind of made us numb and now we want something else.
Okay.
I'm not saying that the pendulum is swinging all the way back over to all we're going to be doing is super family friendly stuff.
Sure.
Because people still like conflict and people still like characters that aren't necessarily admirable. I talk about him all the time. Henry Jenkins, great media scholar. One of the things that he said was that he talks about the audience use of the character. You hear a lot of times that people are terrible role models in reality television. And like, who are you as a role model? Well, are you a role model or are you a cautionary tale? Are you a bad example that is not to be followed? In movies, you know, we talk a lot. I mean, I was very funny. I'm sorry. Now I'm the guy that goes back and starts talking over himself and not completing. I should have taken my 3 seconds. I was at an event last year. John O'Hurley, at the end of speaking to a group of people who were assembled at a very prominent film school, said at the end of his speech, he says, and the one thing I would tell all of you is, don't go into reality television. It's so negative and it's like pulling the wings off of flies and it's just a horrible... And I stood up in the middle of the audience and just stuck my arms out like I just was here for 2 days lecturing about how to get into reality television. People don't get that there's a lot of really great stuff, and I don't think that they use that label reality television for it. I think it's a documentary series, it's a this, it's a that. I'm sorry, it's reality television. It's reality television. Just because people aren't clocking each other over the head with pots or pans or whatever, it doesn't mean that you lose the label reality television. If the phrase reality television disappeared tomorrow and we started judging it as, you know, factual or authentic or some other word, I think that people would get away from constantly damning the stuff that's a little bit more pronounced.
Well, I like what you said. Also, too, it could be an example of a cautionary tale. You know, it doesn't have to be, well, this person's a great example, a pillar of their community. It could also be, well, this is what happens when, let's just take the example of Joe Millionaire, which is something I regurgitate all the time, but I love the show, and it got me back into watching TV for a short time. But it's a perfect example of, you know, women fighting over a man and not really knowing who he was. They just thought he was one thing. And again, perfect example of maybe how people should sort of look at themselves. So obviously there's a market for this because if, you know, going back to what our person on Twitter said, you know, how can you be a part of this? There's a market for it. Yes.
And I would also recommend to anybody who is interested in reality television, I'm not a defender of the low-end material. I don't just say, well, you know, all reality television is fantastic. There is an incredible book that was written by a feminist media scholar. Her name is Jennifer Posner. The book is called Reality Bites Back. It it's a real takedown of how we portray women in media, how we portray minorities in reality shows. One of the things I think reality shows do well is I think you find more cast diversity in reality television than you find in regular programming. The problem is a lot of the shows still, you have the whole princess myth is still all over the place. Like, oh, I just got to meet a man. If I could just meet a man. All the dating shows, it's the same thing. There's a lot that we can work on. And, Jennifer and I talk periodically about the things that we would like to see changed in reality television so that we can be a little bit more evolved and kind of get ourselves out of, those old stories. But in order to be involved, you have to, the old thing they say, vote with your remote.
Right.
And
obviously
follow the good stuff.